Every time I do one of these videos, I'm like, man, I freaking hate cars. I'm so glad that I don't have to do like 9 passages in a row anymore. But today we do another cars passage. This is the second passage from the new AAMC free exam. Some people are calling it FLE 5, but it's a new practice exam. It's a little bit of a long one, so let's go ahead and jump in. I'll break down this passage, give you a main idea, and then show you how to answer most, if not all, questions with just that main idea alone. So, reading this passage, the first thing that we do when we're reading a cars passage is we read the title. So it's called The Long Tail and Public Health, New Thinking for Addressing Health Disparities. So it seems like we're about to talk about public health access with this, quote, long tail, whatever that means. Let's go ahead and start reading it. It says, the prevailing approach to improving population health emphasizes, quote, shifting the mean through prevention efforts that target large groups at high risk for particular conditions, or through mass interventions that encourage small but universal changes in individual behavior. This approach encourages the search for, quote, blockbuster public health interventions that can have the largest effects on determinants of population health and individual behavior. So it seems like what they're saying here is that previously our public health efforts have been to, quote, shift the mean by trying to go through these mass interventions, which is where we try to change one thing for a ton of people at once, or to encourage small but universal changes. So maybe we try to, instead of saying, everybody should completely cut out sugar, this small but universal change would say something like everybody should limit it to 1 soda per day. So something like that. And it says that this approach is trying to help us find these blockbuster public health interventions. So this first paragraph is them saying what they have been doing in public health. So this is pretty MCAT. They might set you up with what has been going on. And then the second paragraph, or maybe even the third, will start to tell you, well, here's this new idea. We'll keep reading. It says new business model. New. So we're about to switch. They're about to tell you what the heck this passage is actually about. New business models, however, demonstrate that selling... I'm going to start over. New business models, however, demonstrate that selling small quantities of many niche items can be more profitable than selling a few blockbuster items. In The Long Tail, Chris Anderson argues that niche markets, subsets of consumers interested in particular products, so this is just their definition for a niche market, are more accessible today than ever, and that although the demand for many particular niche-focused products is limited, there are so many niches that together these products make up a huge market. So he mentions a large online bookstore, probably Amazon, in which half of the top 10,000 books sold less than 1 copy per quarter. So what he's saying is that if you get these multiple niche products and you compile them together, it ends up being more, for the businesses, lucrative, but I guess from a public health perspective, it would be impactful than maybe just trying to sell 1 or 2 blockbuster things. It's kind of like the foot in the door approach. So that's a pretty cool concept, and that's vastly different from this idea of going for the blockbuster approach, right? Understanding how and why businesses profit from this, quote, long tail of niche products, in other words, focusing on consumers at the ends of the distribution curve. And so if you're still confused with what's going on here, the author's trying to explain it a little bit better. So if you are looking at a normal distribution curve with this being the mean, that's awful. Hold on. If you're looking at a normal distribution curve with this being the mean right here, then you would be looking at these 2 portions, which are called the tail. And so this kind of makes sense where they're talking about the long tail. So we're focusing on these niches, and we're able to continue to sell to them, and that ends up getting us more revenue. That's what they're saying. So they're focusing on those consumers at the end of the distribution curve, and that has the potential to transform our thinking about strategies to improve public health. So they're saying, hey, if this is working for businesses, let's implement it for us. Health messages can be thought of as products targeted to specific subgroups of the population, many of which bear a disproportionate burden of disease because of heightened exposures to risk or unequal access to beneficial or health-promoting resources. Such potential subgroups might include some racial and/or ethnic minorities, populations with low income, and those without health insurance. Focusing on vulnerable populations could work to complement rather than replace a population approach. So here they're kind of saying some things that we all know, and that health disparities come with things like income disparities and some of the population demographic barriers that we face. So they're saying maybe if we switch our idea of health messaging and almost make it more business-like, that we'll be able to be targeted, and that will help us reach those needy populations. And it could complement rather than replace a population approach. So continuing on, it says the number and complexity of niche markets increases exponentially when we consider how certain illnesses and preventative services affect different population subgroups with different constellations of demographic, geographic, and health status risk factors. Man, they are making this passage so much more difficult to read than it should be. Approaches which might be targeted to groups as diverse as migrant, farm workers in rural communities. So I guess they're just like flexing how diverse they can be here. Parents of children with asthma, the poor asthmatics. I have asthma. Of course I do, look at me. And Alaskan natives aged 50 years and older, creating effective, tailored health resources for this near infinite number of combinations of subgroups and health issues is a daunting task. Traditionally, local organizations have created resources targeted to particular users, but they are unlikely to have a kind of funding, capacity, and infrastructure that larger organizations do. So local organizations have tried to do this, but it's unlikely that they have the money and the infrastructure to implement this kind of niche approach. Furthermore, because there are few mechanisms for efficient sharing among niche-serving organizations, duplication is bound to occur. One study identified 116 different types of printed cancer education materials that target African Americans. I mean, you're just not going to get around that. People are going to duplicate other people's work to try to improve upon it. But what are they trying to say to us here? Because here, so far, what we've really been trying to set up is this idea that maybe we should shift the way that we think about population metrics to this niche idea and target the ends of the curve. So how does this paragraph add to that? Well, number one, it adds to that by actually talking about the populations we're interested in and maybe kind of spitballing about how we could possibly do this and some pitfalls to avoid, like duplication, or maybe some traps that have been set along the ways, some roadblocks like running into funding. They're kind of explaining why this has not been done effectively already. Then they go on to talk about the internet. I love how this is capitalized. It lets you know how long ago this was written, 2014. Maybe it lets you know about the age of the person that wrote it. The internet has been invaluable in facilitating the distribution of niche products, making it easy for consumers to find niche products through the use of filters, recommendation systems, and ratings. The internet's good, you don't say. The opportunity to sample an unfamiliar product before buying it, to read a chapter from a book, for instance, lowers the consumer risk. Finally, the ability to customize a product to a user's needs or preferences can increase its appeal. So they're just saying that the internet's awesome. I agree. In order to create health communication materials targeted to specific populations, organizations can take advantage of internet-based resources. So you notice at the beginning, they're like, this is what we're doing. This is kind of like what we should do, maybe. And these are some barriers to doing it. And these are some ways that we can do it. So everything here is revolving around this idea of moving towards a niche approach and how to do it. So just keep that in mind. You should be formulating your main idea as you're reading through this passage like I am right now. But regardless, let's talk about the internets. The Make It Your Own, the Mayo, very different from Froyo system, is an online tool that helps users create health communication materials for the specific populations that they serve. Users, quote, build material by choosing from a menu of evidence-based approaches recommended by the Guide to Community Preventative Services, then customize them by choosing from a library of images, messages, and graphic designs. Mayo renders their creations into electronic documents that can be printed, emailed, texted, all used online, or distributed, and other ways to target audiences. This approach might work as well for other evidence-based public health solutions such as campaigns, social marketing, behavioral interventions, or worksite and or school-based programs. That said freaking nothing. This is pretty much just like saying that the internet's awesome. You can customize stuff and you can find niche markets. And this Mayo tool is something that allows you to do that. I don't know why they talked so much, but that's what they were trying to say. So let's look at a main idea. First, you should pause and try to make your own. And now we can look at mine. So for my main idea, I said niche targeting could help improve population health. And then I gave a little dash internet/Mayo as possible ways that we could do this. So you'll notice that my main idea is pretty short, and that's because like you're running on a time limit whenever you are studying or whenever you're taking practice passages. So I am trying to condense and write my main idea in 30 seconds or less. But what is built into here for me, whenever I say niche targeting, I am implying this idea of rather than us trying to just offer blockbuster deals, then let's take this more business marketing approach of targeting niches. And that could improve population health. So here, if I have that improving population health is in the main idea, well, then that's probably pretty important to the author, right? Then I have internet and Mayo as some options to do that, as some ways to possibly offer niche targeting, which can improve population health. So your main idea should mean a lot more to you than the words that you have written down on it. And that's how you're going to be able to apply it the most. All right, let's take these questions. Question number first says, which statement is least relevant to the passage as a whole? Okay, so if you've watched a lot of IFD videos, or maybe if you haven't, this is your first one, you notice that there are two strategies that we're just kind of crazy about. The first one is the flowcharting method, and that's really only useful for the sciences. And the second one is restating or simplifying the question stem. And so I'm going to be simplifying the question stem for all of these that I can, and you should too. I really think that's the most, if you get anything from watching these videos with Maggie and myself, I really want you to take that, because that's the skill that's going to translate over to the MCAT, to medical school, to STEP exams, and probably to, seeing patients in the exam room. So I'm going to rephrase this question as, which of these has nothing to do with the main idea? So which of these is not the main idea? A says health messages can be thought of as products. Well, that's kind of like the whole thing, right? So if we think of it as products, then we can do niche targeting. So, that's pretty important to the main idea. B says health messages can be targeted to specific population subgroups. That is what niche targeting is. So that is the main idea. So I'll say maybe not to B. C says specific population subgroups may be receptive to, quote, blockbuster messages. Now, were we talking about blockbuster? Yes, but was blockbuster messages are part of our main idea, or was the replacement for blockbuster messages our main idea? The replacement was, right? So is it relevant that blockbusters might work? Probably not. So we'll say maybe to C. I kind of like C. D says specific population subgroups may have unequal access to beneficial resources. Well, that's the reason that we need niche targeting, right? That's the reason we need to improve population health. So that's pretty relevant to the main idea. So I'd say maybe not to D. Correct answer is C. I think the second best answer is D here, because it does not deal specifically with niche targeting, which is what like this whole passage was about. Number next says, which statement would most weaken the likelihood that the Mayo system, again, very different from the Froyo system, remember that, make a flashcard of that, would help to create evidence-based public health solutions. So I'm going to rephrase this as, which of these is an argument against Mayo? So which of these is a valid argument against Mayo? A says the targeted users of the Mayo system are public health organizations rather than individuals. I don't know if that's necessarily a great argument against it, because if it's effective, then it doesn't really matter who's making it. So maybe to A, because personally it would be better to me if the individuals were the ones that were making it, so that it would be as personalized as possible, but then they may not even do it. So maybe not A, so maybe A. We'll leave it in. Hopefully we find something better. B says, incorporating the use of the internet is not the only way to apply the long tail approach to public health interventions. I don't know how that's an argument against Mayo. I mean, yeah, maybe there's other alternatives, but this doesn't say that Mayo is bad, so maybe not B. C says the Mayo system does not necessarily make the goal of, quote, blockbuster interventions less desirable. It doesn't have to make the goal of those interventions less desirable to be useful. So maybe not C. D says many public health challenges require social or political solutions that digital products and information alone cannot provide. So maybe this is a good argument against it, saying that, like, if somebody doesn't have the resources to purchase your healthy food, it doesn't matter how many ebooks you make them about what healthy eating is. So maybe that's a good critique of it, is that information's only information if there's not action behind it. So answer choice D is better than A for me for that reason, because there's really no twisting it to make it to where it's kind of better. So I like D. D is the correct answer. Number 8, 9, 10. So the reason I say number next a lot is because whenever I was a scribe, one of the physicians, that is exactly how he would tell me to go to, like, the next line for the problem sheet. And it always used to tick me off. But now I think it's funny to say it. So number next. Niche populations often do not benefit from broadly targeted approaches. What is the relevance of this statement to the passage? Well, this right here kind of sounds like the main idea, doesn't it? That we don't necessarily see the most benefit from a niche approach. So, does this agree with the main idea? We're looking for that pretty much. A says it supports the need for an alternative to the prevailing approach to improving population health. A sounds great. It's saying this is pretty much the reason that we're looking to pivot. So I like A. It agrees with my main idea because it agrees with here, right here. B says it explains why the kind of, quote, long-tail thinking advocated by Anderson will be of only limited value to public. No, not limited value, right? We talked about how it would be really helpful. C, it suggests that the Mayo system described in the passage will not achieve its intended public health goal. The question is an argument as to why it would achieve it, so that is what makes this one wrong. D says it challenges the critique. D says it challenges the critique of local public organizations with respect to funding, capacity, and infrastructure. Saying that they don't benefit from broad-scale approaches does not mean that they're not poor or that they don't need help with funding. So D is not the correct answer. A is correct. It is supporting that need for an alternative approach. Number 11 says, which statement is implied but not stated in the passage? So it's really not a great way to rephrase this one. Usually they're getting at something that's rather than the main idea, going to be like a big ticket argument, which if you've seen our strategy videos on getting and creating a solid main idea, that you know what I'm talking about there. But let's go through it. A says Mayo could address some of the inefficiencies expressed by local organizations. So that is implied, and I don't specifically remember it being stated. Mayo is an approach that's going to help these organizations create better resources, is essentially the purpose of Mayo. So I like A in here. B says a population health approach focused on population subgroups is not intended to supplant a broad-based approach. I'm not even super sure what that means. I think they're trying to say that a niche approach is not intended to supplant or improve or completely replace a broad-based approach. And that is specifically stated, right? They say, it's at the end of a paragraph. Where is it? Oh yeah, it says that it's going to complement it. So this niche approach is going to complement rather than replace. So I don't like B then, because it is stated. C says internet-based approaches to population health interventions are unlikely to achieve the success of innovations or initiatives backed by large national organizations. No, that goes against the main idea. They're saying, the main idea is saying, like, we can do this. We don't necessarily need, a giant federal push to do something. We need to target specific groups because that's how businesses do it. So don't like C for that reason. D says it is very difficult to create targeted health messages for some of the population subgroups described in the passage. I don't necessarily know that that's implied. I mean, they said that they had 116 different types of cancer education for African Americans alone. So I don't know that that's necessarily that different if 116 people are replicating the same thing. So maybe not to D, and I'm going to leave A as the correct answer. Number next says, which element of the internet is, again, the capital I, it's killing me, is not mentioned in the passage as valuable for the distribution of niche products. So this is one of the few questions where I would recommend that you are going to kind of divert back to the passage, because they're pretty much saying, which of these did I actually not talk about? So when we talked about the internet, you remember there was like one paragraph specifically, and it's this one right here. So it's the next to the last paragraph. So our question says, which of these is not mentioned specifically in the passage as being helpful? So A is being able to sample, B is purchase convenience, C is customization, and D is ease of finding. So let's go ahead and read this paragraph. It says the internet has been invaluable for facilitating the distribution of niche products, making it easy for consumers to find products. So that's one of them. The opportunity to sample an unfamiliar product before buying it, for instance. And finally, the ability to customize. So we're going to roll out sampling, we're going to roll out ease of find, and we're going to roll out customization and customizability? Customization. I don't know. I'm a science guy. And that leaves B as the correct answer, because they didn't talk about purchase convenience. They talked about it being easy to find. It's nice to sample, but they didn't talk about purchase convenience, like Amazon, just that one-click buy. That's dangerous. Number next to last says, why does the author most likely mention migrant farm workers in paragraph 4? So you know me, if they tell me exactly where to go, I usually go back and kind of like reacquaint myself with the scenario. So paragraph 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, here, we're talking about migrant farm workers. So approaches might be targeted to groups as diverse as migrant farm workers, Little John growing up, or Little John's parents, and Alaskan natives aged 50 years and older. So remember whenever we talked about this, we talked about how they were pretty much just like flexing the diversity of this approach and like how far it could reach, the different tails of the graph here. Different tails. And so let's see an answer that agrees with that. We're looking for something that's going to emphasize that specific idea. A says, to give an example of the kind of population group that might be difficult to reach with a long tail approach. Is it difficult to reach them, or is that who this is good at reaching? That's who it's good at reaching, so maybe not A. B says to give an example of the range of health statuses and circumstances that might require targeted resources. Yeah, that's just saying we're flexing how many people, or which of the people, what type of people are at the ends of the distribution that could benefit from this. So I like B a lot. I'm going to read the others. C says to provide support for the argument that broader health initiatives have an important place in public health. No, broader sucks. We want it skinny here. We want targeted niche approaches. D says to provide support for the argument that a long tail approach has not been tried in circumstances where it might be useful. That's not why they brought up migrant farm workers. That doesn't even sound right. Don't put D. Correct answer here is B. And number last, it says, suppose that people who live in low-income neighborhoods are less likely than people in affluent neighborhoods to have access to community recreational facilities and lighted sidewalks. How would this affect passage claims? So usually whenever you have a suppose that question, what they're getting at is this idea of, I'm going to give you some weird random scenario and I need you to apply it. So the scenario that they gave you is this idea that we have individuals in low-income neighborhoods are having trouble because they do not have access to the facilities that those in affluent neighborhoods do have. And then it says, how would this affect passage claims? So does this agree with what the passage talked about? And the answer is yeah, right? It agrees that we talked about how if it's difficult to find resources, it's pretty tough to be healthy. And so A says it would challenge claims about the, quote, long tail approach to public health. No. Those are the people that we need to niche target. Those are the people that are in the long tail. Maybe not A. B says it would support passage claims with access to beneficial resources. Well, yeah, that's exactly what we said. They talked about that extensively. C says it would undermine claims about the value of, quote, blockbuster interventions. I mean, if you could have a blockbuster intervention that would, like, I don't know, maybe if you gave everybody flashlight and like it helped made them lose 30 pounds, like that'd be awesome, but that's not what they're talking about. So no, that is not impacting the passage in that fashion. It is not undermining blockbuster interventions because this wasn't even brought up in the context of blockbuster interventions. And D says it would reinforce claims about the funding capacity and infrastructure of local organization. I could see this one being pretty tempting because your brain's going to run and say, oh, well, if they had the funding and the infrastructure, then they could build this stuff. But is that what the passage was saying? No, whenever the passage discussion about these things was just saying that sometimes the efforts of small organizations was not as impactful as that of large organizations because they didn't have the money. So D is actually, though it's very tempting, it's in the conversation of another, or it's in context of another conversation. So D is not correct for that reason, because even though it sounds super relevant, and I low-key had it kind of between a 50-50 between the two. Correct answer is B here, because D is just out of context, but it's really sneaky then. Really good incorrect answer choice. So that's it. Thank you for watching the video. Make sure to check out the links in the description so that you can study with us, and I will see you in the next one.